Bike Safety Podcast with Vance and Bart.
It's a trap, and there's no comfort fitting in a fake safety that no one believes in.
My laptop's low on battery, so I had to plug it in. I got this little fucking charger. Same one that goes on your phone. What's this called here? That's chewed up by my dog a little bit, but USB C.
As opposed to USB no?
Right? No. I got USB-C, I got USB 3, I got USB.
You got your Hoosker do's, Hoosker don'ts.
I got USB, the USB 3.0. And then they have the 4.0s now too, the red ones. Those are fast, I guess.
Well, that's as fast as it's going to get.
Oh, man.
That's not entirely true. There is going to be some stagnation. Undoubtedly, you've heard about the Parliament's approval for the initiative in the EU for USB-C as opposed to the USB no. If you haven't heard,
I have heard. I really have. I try to act like I don't hear stuff from across the pond, from those civilized folks over there. But I do. My wife likes the royal family and shit like that, so I hear some of these things. I think this will affect us over here, though, because obviously there's going to be cost into developing. You're not going to develop something for over there and develop something for over here. Most likely you're going to make it, even if you don't keep the USB-C everywhere else, you're going to have like a plug and play type thing to change it. So that's going to add cost to the boards of everything.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, the EU has passed a measure. There has been
EU.
So after Parliament's approval, the idea is that by the end of 2024, the initiative is that all mobile phones, tablets, and cameras sold in the EU will have to be equipped with USB-C charging ports. And then from 2026 on, that will extend to laptops. So I think it's pretty clear from both of our stances that we're not all that in favor of stagnating and crippling innovation.
I'd say we're pretty fucking opposed. Excuse my language. I would say we're pretty opposed to it.
Yeah.
I would strongly, I think, would be a good description of how opposed.
But I think it is also important to maybe steelman the argument a bit, but also to clarify it, because I do think that this is a very confusing subject for people who haven't really been following technology for a long time. So while I do have a lot of issues with this measure, I also want to make sure that people are informed about what it actually is. So I don't want to be too mansplaining about it, but there is a difference between the USB protocol and the USB Type-C plug. So just as a quick refresher. The USB protocol and the USB plug were essentially one and the same when USB was introduced in like the 90s. Now USB 2.0 was introduced, I don't know. These things are generally on about a 7-year loop, just like most other innovations, right? About 7 years until you get sort of another iteration.
Hotel remodels, same
Exactly, right?
same time. Yeah.
And the human body refreshes itself or whatever that is. All the cells regenerate, I think, something like that. 7-year itch, etc. But started in the 90s.
Points come off your license. 7. Well, we should really look into this shit. What's up
Things
with
fall
7?
off your credit score.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, what's happening? Someone should
Did
make
we
a film
just-
about that.
Did we just solve the Matrix?
But USB, the plug, and USB, the protocol were one and the same, really, in practice. Initially in the 90s, the standard evolved, went through for higher speeds, but essentially kept the same plug. You would see, and that would be USB A, which is what I think most people would think of when they think of USB, that rectangular plug, Type A, not to be confused with Type A personalities, but a Type A plug. But the protocol and the standard changed. The plug did not, but the standard changed, and the devices got faster. And then another 7 years goes by, and folks find that protocol needs to adapt, to improve, to adjust. But the plug is a bit of a barrier because it's small in relative terms, but as devices got smaller, the size of that plug actually were quite large relative to small devices, wearables, watches, phones, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you get what was the sort of mobile standard for another 7 years or so, which was USB micro, which kind of flowed through the USB 2.0 and 3.0 protocols. It's technically, I believe, the micro A plug. There was the mini for a bit, but I won't go into that. Generally, micro was like the most ubiquitous. And then that was supplanted by the USB Type C plug, which a lot of folks see now with their laptops and mobile phones, things like that. Pretty much everything except for Apple devices, where they're like Lightning ports or something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about at the time when another plug would likely be introduced. I will say, based on the fact that both the Thunderbolt protocol as well as the USB protocol use the USB Type-C plug, it gets very confusing, but it also means that the plug would probably have a few more years of life in it because two standards are using it.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, though, I could make an argument that for that reason, there needs to be differentiation between the two. But all that having been said,
I know
the
it'd
plug
make it
is
buying
about...
a docking station a lot easier for a Dell Latitude. Just saying.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And I think that is the intent behind an initiative like this. It is the narrative. It is the talking point. It is the...
Is it the intent or is it the excuse? The propaganda to get what they want? Because I think it's more nefarious. I think there is a intelligence to the stupidity that is government. I don't think that politicians nor voters nor the people on TV in the news are telling us that they're the smart ones. But I do think that all of their dumb ideas that they come up with, there is more intelligent evil letting the right ones through, the right stupid idea through.
Maybe so. Maybe so. The reason I did want to do a bit of tech jargon up top, though, is to lay the foundation for one of the reasons why that's a little bit harder of a sell for me. The reason is this is an open standard. So as opposed to other monopolies, we'll say, this isn't something that is exclusive to a region, exclusive to a company, exclusive to even an industry, really. It is a somewhat universal, open standard. And it's not a very expensive plug to produce, as
Now
I'm sure you've seen with a lot of
it will
your...
be more once it's regulated into being the only one that's allowed.
So
Uh,
I'd like to talk about that because I don't think that's actually true.
Have you shipped stuff on railways? I mean, it's the same thing.
What do you
It's
mean
the
by
same
that?
type of, like, the regulation that created the raise in like freight on railways. You know, it was all to simplify it, to make it standardized, so there wouldn't be undercutting and things like that, and uh, it'd just be simpler for everybody to ship their goods and know what price to charge. Um, and all it did was made things more expensive, created a because what they'll do is they'll raise the price. Everybody who makes it will raise the price because the demand will go up. And so that'll be their excuse. They'll raise the price and then they can continue to do it. And the free market isn't allowed to fix the problem because you can't come in with, the other thing that you have that could do the job. Um, and then people will say, well, there should be regulation on this. They can't be charged. And just like um, well, typically it'll actually be the manufacturers of the plug that'll do this in disguise as, um, just like the railways did in America. And what they did was said, oh, they shouldn't be allowed to get such a profit. We should regulate the amount of profit they can get. And then, they came, oh, well, from now on, they can only get 5% profit. What that did was that guaranteed 5% profit for the railways in America. That meant like they weren't allowed to get more than 5%. So that standardized. That meant that every rail company that was already established had got 5%, meaning that anybody coming in could only get 5%, no matter what their cost. If they kept their costs down, they're only allowed to get 5% profit. That means that they can't compete, right? It'll be the same thing with this. It always is. It's because a company in a system, whatever system that is looking for the edge, looking for a way to guarantee a future, improve a future, or whatnot, what have you. So they're always, anytime you add a regulation, you've added an artificial thing in there to exploit. And they always find a way.
So I can appreciate what you're saying about the railways, and I think that is valid. But I don't think this is quite the same because this isn't mandating anything that can truly be monopolized, because all it is mandating is a specification.
Right.
And it's not a specification that anyone has exclusive rights to. And it's not something that is particularly difficult or expensive to produce.
For the sake of the argument, let's say you're right. Let's say that doesn't happen. What happens with almost everything else, right? What's then what's the benefit? The cost of everything goes up, right? And there
No, so
is
that's not a foregone conclusion.
okay, then let's say the cost doesn't go up. Then technology doesn't advance. Or technology advances beyond it, but for some stupid reason we're still paying for a fucking USB-C plug on the side of our thing. So the USB-C manufacturers don't have to buy new capital to advance their technology. They can continue making that fucking chip, that little plug-in for a motherboard that forever. Even if people aren't even using it anymore, everybody's, sticking their laptop on their table because all tables have wireless charging on them nowadays. The whole top is wireless charging. I mean, how far away are we from that? And nobody ever uses it, but yet, for some reason, we have it. It's worthless for data transfer. We're way beyond that with data transfer. So we're paying for a part that nobody needs. We're not far away from paying for a USB-C port on our laptops that we don't need. Nobody uses.
So I think that's the part that I want to tease out, because so often, and I think this has happened with the railways and other monopolies before, where it has been malicious and it has been some sort of political maneuver, like we've talked about before with like regulatory capture of making regulations around the telecommunications companies or something to kick the ladder out from those beneath them. But this, I truly want to embrace Hanlon's razor here. Never attribute to malice, right? I think this is more easily explained by incompetence than malice, because there isn't like a company that makes USB-C plugs that's just going to continue to forever profit off of this. It's more that every company that makes motherboards or cases or chipsets or chassis, they will then have to just make this plug a part of that build for the future. I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you follow the money, this actually doesn't benefit any one stream of people in particular.
I would say it does the opposite to a lot of people, though. It's a net loss for everybody buying stuff.
I agree. But I think the thing that is important in these discussions is that we're responsible with our critique.
Okay.
Because it's easy for
I
us to
still
say,
believe it is malice. I don't like. I understand your point and I take it seriously, and I can see why you're there. But I would say in the past 3 years, I've become a lot more jaded on this whole: is it malice, or is it part of the globalist agenda, or is it just stupidity? And I think it's always stupidity, but I think the globalists let the right stupidity through, and I think there's a reason why they're doing that in
well,
the EU, but I don't know what it is.
let's do this exercise then instead. So, like I say, if you follow the money, it doesn't necessarily benefit anyone in particular because this isn't like a resource that is finite or something that
Right,
is captured,
but
right?
it
So
doesn't have to benefit somebody that much because if you look into how much politicians are paid by, at least here in the U.S., there are tools to find out kind of the bribery that goes on. It's legal bribery because it's disguised as something else, but um, it doesn't take that much for a politician to be bought, especially for something that they can spin as I'm doing it for the people, you know?
let's maybe look at the point that you made earlier. So you said, okay, it's not going to benefit any one person in particular, but it is going to harm multiple people, right? So who does this harm the most?
I would say in the long run, for sure, the poorest of us because they're trying to buy, when they go and buy a phone that's the cheapest phone on the market, and they got to pay $2 more for it because it's also got to have the USB-C port on it, right? That $2 or, $200 by the time that this becomes an issue, um, is a big percentage of a bigger percentage of their income than the $2 to a rich person.
In the short term, though,
In the short term, probably the court, they won't, everybody, when you're out drinking with your buddies and you forgot your cord, you'll be able to plug it in. Everybody be like, well, I'm glad that she did that because I forgot my charger and I can now charge on anybody's charger. I don't have to buy a charger cord at Walmart or at Quick Trip. Do they have Quick Trips in Europe? They don't have Quick Trips in Europe, do they? The BP station. They don't have to buy a cord there.
now who is harmed in the short term?
If there is any extra cost to the board makers, it'll be a very slight again on the poor. But if there's no extra cost in that, it would probably be everybody developing a new technology for said charging. Because if it's like a cord type charging, um, and you're developing it to hope to sell, it's just not going to be looked at. So there's a lot of development that can be harmed from this.
So have you considered which companies would have the highest migration cost to switch to this standard?
I haven't, I guess, but I would say that Apple's gone out of the way not to have the USB-C on any of its things, or so maybe Apple might get hit a little harder, or maybe Apple will get an exemption. Who knows? I don't know who they've paid for.
Or is this possibly a case of Apple saying that they don't need to buy and pay for someone, and the response is,
Well, fuck your cord. You got to use ours. It could be something is sinister is it could be something that trivial. Um,
well,
but
just
there's a
let's
lot of
just touch on
people
that for a
that,
second. So, is that trivial?
in the sense of the World Economic Forum and global, uh, one world government type stuff, I'd say yes. But to Apple, to the bottom line at Apple, no, I guess it's probably considerable to them. And it'll maybe not as much now, but it'll take away from that that different you feel when you have an Apple product as opposed to something else. Even though the plug itself doesn't really do much, it it's there's a different feeling than plugging in that USB-C. I mean, this right here, while it works very well, it is ugly. And the Apple charger, no shit, it just looks cleaner. It looks more high tech, I guess. While it probably isn't.
So it would be fair to say that Apple would stand to lose in the immediate term millions, but maybe even in the long term some additional millions in damage to their brand and ability to set themselves apart. Yeah?
Yeah, I'd say that, and that's something that Apple is struggling with now too. So it's probably even a worse hit. They've really struggled to stand apart further than they were standing apart, 6 years ago,
Now,
which used to be a something Apple just doing on a reg.
now if I'm a regulator and I'm in talks with a company that has a market cap higher than my country's GDP,
Mm-hmm.
how do I feel toward that company?
How do I feel about that company? I realize that the pie, it's not a pie, that we're only cutting off. There's not a certain amount of slices. So I'm not indifferent how big a company is or how much money they make, because there is a benefit to them being very successful to me, even if I'm in a completely different field. So as long as they're successful in a free market type sense, where they're not stealing, they're just providing a good enough product or service. So that's how I feel. How do your typical mercantilist or Keynesian or somebody like that, or propagandized in our school system person feel? They're jealous. They think that there is a pie and there's only a certain amount of slices. And they think that person or that company got a bigger slice than they did because they don't understand economics.
But if you're a regulator and you are seeing a company that's large enough that they no longer care about lobbying because they can actually overpower you.
So instead of paying the lobbyist, now they're just don't give a shit.
They don't pay anybody.
Yeah, because
why would they? Because if their market cap is larger than your GDP, they don't have to convince anybody because they are such a behemoth that no one's going to be able to compete with them.
Well, yeah, and then now we see what's going on naturally with them. And you're like, oh, well, that wasn't right, which is an argument against monopoly and stuff like that. Anyway, but I get what you're saying. I don't know I don't feel like Apple's that far out of the loop. I think there's been times when they've been more out of the loop, but I don't think they're so out of the loop anymore.
What do you mean by that?
I think they're in with the bad guys, very much so. There was a time when, like, there was a rebelness to the company, and I felt like while I didn't trust them, they were better. Uh, Like when they wouldn't give the code or whatever, create a backdoor for the cops, things like that. Those are things that made me believe in Apple, right? But then there's things like, oh, we're gonna take apps off of the the app store that say the vaccines don't work, that give a platform for somebody to say the vaccines don't work. And that's the Apple today, and they're very much in with the system. So while I could see this being a petty company, when I say petty, I mean not to them millions and millions of dollars, but it could be something that's not wasn't intended on hurting me in America. Uh, and it was a company who bought politicians and another company who didn't, or didn't buy the right ones. Um, it's still gonna hurt me and poor people either way. I just, I don't know. I tend to think there's a reason more than that. I think there's a reason with us in mind, with controlling people, whether it be the government wants to develop, they already know a good way to have something that they can plug into a USB-C port and get access to your whatever, and they don't have it figured out with other ports or certain other ports, or they just want to develop one for one port. I don't know, but I think there's something bigger than just I don't like Apple. And it could have been like, oh, we're going to develop something to hack their computer. It goes into a port. And then, highest bidder wins. You know what I mean? Apple, you lose. It could be a mixture of the two, which is probably more likely. But I do know what we have covered is there isn't any good reason, a helpful reason for this to be going on. There's a lot of bad reasons to do this, but all the on the surface seem like it's a good idea things turn out to be when you really think about them.
So, circling back to those reasons, being that we want to standardize things so it's easier for everyone to have a level playing field.
Start.
The other being e-waste, minimizing e-waste by incentivizing people to keep things longer and making things compatible for longer, not having to buy a new charger, not creating more metal and plastic waste because your old charger works, things like that.
If you're worried about e-waste and metals and toxins and gas and pollutants and all that, maybe we should stop funding the Ukraine war stuff, with missiles and heavy metal toxins and stuff. Not to mention prolonging the war and the amount of deaths caused by it. Just saying.